What an afternoon and evening of college football we have seen on November the 10th. Of course, a little later on, we're going to talk about the stunner in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Defending national champions, #1 ranked Alabama, loses to SEC newcomer Texas A&M. Like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, breaking down the Baylor-Oklahoma game, and I'm never going to apologize for an Oklahoma victory, okay? Winning beats losing, and Bob Stoops a few years ago said after a big win, there's a fine line between winning and losing, and he's definitely right. That being said, for Oklahoma, this was not a crisp performance, especially toward the end of the game when there was a lot more drama than, believe me, there needed to be. But they do get the victory. Winning beats losing 42-34. The Sooners hold on to beat the Baylor Bears. Look, some of you already know that Baylor entered this game as the #1 passing offense in the country, averaging nearly 400 yards per game. You also probably knew that Baylor did feature a running attack with Martin, and as we saw in this game, Seastrunk. But some OU fans probably still believe that this was going to be a game in which Baylor wasn't going to have any offensive success. If you thought that, you were kidding yourself. I said it earlier in the week on the weekly matchup show that Baylor would be able to move the ball at times and would be able to get some points. Of course, they surprised me a little bit by being able to score 34. I thought that they would score at least 20 in the ball game. But the bottom line was that Baylor was going to have some success, and they did after a slow starting opening quarter. And you have to give both teams credit in this game, too, because TV does not do the eyes justice, because unless you were at the game, you really can't understand how much wind there was. It was a south wind that was probably about 25 miles an hour, at times gusting over 40. And believe me, whether the wind's at your back or in your face, it's going to play some tricks on you. And I thought both teams, considering that they had to deal with extreme windy conditions on this Saturday in Norman, I thought both teams held their own. For Oklahoma, they started off well in this game. First 2 drives, 2 touchdowns. We saw them run for a little success, but they had to be able to run in order to at least make Baylor guess. Passing game, the first 2 drives was amazing. Landry Jones was amazing. In fact, first drive, completed every pass but one, and the pass that he didn't complete was not his fault. It was a drop. But we saw the Sooners, first quarter, lead 14-3, and then second quarter, saw them commit penalties, we saw some missed throws, and we even saw some drop passes. Without that, the game might have been able to have been put away at that point. Because at some point, you had to figure that the Baylor offense was going to figure some things out. But what's surprising about this game was that Baylor was able to figure things out, and you have to give them credit for this, by running the football. They can run the ball, even though passing is their forte. Bottom line is that they were able to run the ball effectively with Seastrunk, with Martin, and also with Nick Florence on those quarterback draws. And right before halftime, it looked like, oh my goodness, we've got a 21-17 ball game, and it looks like with Baylor getting the ball in the second half, this thing is going to be a lot more interesting than many people anticipated. And then the big kickoff return by Brennan Clay, which got the ball in Baylor territory with just under a minute to go. And just like he did last week against Iowa State, Landry Jones with a big touchdown pass right before the half. Last week it was to Kenny Stills. This time it was to Justin Brown, who made a spectacular catch under tough coverage. And right before halftime, Oklahoma led 28-17, and believe me, in this game, they needed every point they could get. And then second half, we saw with Baylor driving that opening possession of the second half, Tony Jefferson making a huge play with Baylor knocking on the door on that third down play, in which Baylor was trying to run it in, and they were stopped short, and that forced Baylor to kick a field goal, making it 28-20. Could have been a much worse situation. Could have been 28-24, but at least OU had an 8-point lead at that point. Beginning of the third quarter, the OU offense had some problems. The Damian Williams fumble, and then Landry Jones throwing one of the worst passes I've ever seen him throw in his career, an interception that would lead to Baylor points. The first interception, OU survived by holding Baylor, turnover on downs, but not so lucky on the second possession, in which Baylor was able to score a touchdown. Thankfully, they missed a 2-point conversion. Looked like they were trying some kind of a special option play that they were probably saving for that particular conversion attempt. and it was 28-26. Remember, Baylor never led in this ball game. Then finally, the Oklahoma offense, they finally quit committing some mistakes. They were finally able to get the running game going, and then the passing game, receivers were able to hold on to passes, and Landry Jones overcame that earlier interception. And, of course, Ed Cunningham, that big mouth from ABC Sports, whom a week ago said that the Belldozer offense was ineffective, that OU Sooners should just scrap it, get rid of it. Well, how about a Blake Bell 55-yard run for a touchdown out of the Belldozer formation? And then later, OU would get another touchdown in the ball game. Damian Williams would score. At that point, the Sooners led by 16 points. A little disappointed in the end, though, that the Sooners could not put the ball game away. They gave up a sack, which I guess would be the only sack of the game that they would allow off a Baylor blitz. That kept it at 16 points. Baylor, throughout this game, time and time again, was converting on third down. I think they were 11-20 on third down, 2 of 4 on fourth. The Sooners, by the way, offensively, good thing they were effective on third down conversions. They had an even higher percentage. But the Oklahoma defense, a lot of the times in this game, just had a hard time being able to stop Baylor. And that was primarily with the running game. Seastrunk looks like he's going to be a running back of the future in the Big 12. He was a good one. His quickness was just flat out amazing. It really impressed me quite a bit. The Sooners hang on. In the end, it was just kind of one of those games where it kind of looked like they were going, kind of going through the motions. But they get the W. They get revenge from that loss last year, that heartbreaking loss last year in Waco. They win the game. And like I said, we knew entering this game that Baylor's offense was going to be pretty hard to contain. But I thought it was going to be hard to contain from the standpoint of the passing game. And instead it was the running game that made this game a little more dramatic than it had to be. Given my grades for OU, first of all, the offense in this situation, I am going to go with a B-. The running game in the early going was not spectacular, but it did eventually get going later on. The passing game got off to a really good start, had some bumpy moments along the way, and in the end, it ended up being pretty good for the Sooners. So I'm going to go B-. Terrific distribution for the receivers, for Shepard, for Justin Brown, for Kenny Stills, for Jalen Saunders, for those guys, and even on the backfield, Damian Williams as well as Trey Miller. So good balance there. Defense, I'm going to go with a C+. You might be thinking, well, OU gave up over 30 points in the ball game, 34 as a matter of fact. How come you're giving them such a high grade at C+? Remember, this is a Baylor offense that can go for over 500 yards per ball game. They've been known doing that throughout the season, even in losses. So the fact that OU kept them under 500 yards, that does deserve at least a little bit of applause, especially when you consider that the Sooners could not force one turnover. So all things considered, we've seen worse efforts defensively this year from other Big 12 teams. The Sooners' defense today, they weren't exactly spectacular. But then again, I thought one of the big plays in the game was that Jefferson stop when Baylor had that opening second-half drive and made it 28-20, a little bit of a moral victory right there. And I think they also did enough later on in the half to come up with some stops. Of course, fourth quarter bended a little bit, but thankfully OU had just enough. So I'm going to go C+. Special teams-wise, I'm going to go B+ in this situation. Sooners didn't attempt any field goals. The coverage, once again, was pretty good as far as the punt coverage and kick coverage. In fact, today we saw quite a few touchbacks. It didn't matter if OU was kicking into the wind or with it. Baylor really didn't have a chance to display their fine speed on special teams. And then speaking of special teams, as far as how it really worked for Oklahoma, had a couple of nice kick returns, including one that led to a touchdown right before half. So I'm going to go B+. Overall, it's really hard to say. It's either going to be B- or C+. You know what? I'll go B- for the Sooners. Again, it wasn't a spectacular performance, but they were clutch when they had to be. They got the win. And in the end, you know what? That's really all that counts. I'd like to see them get better between now and the end of the season. You know what? You take a win over a loss any day of the week. So for the Sooners, Morgantown, West Virginia, and another high-powered offense in the West Virginia Mountaineers, whom today, what's new, they give up a plethora of points. I think they gave up 55, in fact, today to Oklahoma State. West Virginia is going the wrong direction. Another loss, that's 4 for them. One of the big disappointments this year in college football. However, the Sooners cannot let up. They have to be able to go into Morgantown, get off to a good start, negate the crowd advantage, and keep on track toward a possible at-large BCS berth. That's all gone if they lose to West Virginia, a team that historically has given them fits, but at least the Sooners are having a better year right now than the Mountaineers. Talking about college football real quick, the Alabama Crimson Tide, it was almost a given that they were going to be playing in the national championship. It looks like that's gone. Texas A&M, a new Southeast Conference member, goes into Tuscaloosa. Johnny Football, they get off to a good start, 20-0. Hold on in the end, 29-24. No question, Kansas State, Notre Dame, and Oregon. We're recording this show, by the way, before their particular games tonight are over. All three are playing tonight, so we don't know how their games finished up. But you know that they are got to be smiling big time because it makes the path for two of those teams a little bit easier down the stretch. So Bama, and right now it doesn't look like an SEC team is going to be playing for the national championship, which will mark the first time since 05 Texas that any non-SEC team has won the BCS national title. That's 7 years. That's hard to believe. Again, final score, the Oklahoma Sooners do just enough to beat Baylor 42-34. Don't forget, I'll have my weekly matchup show. OU West Virginia probably will be November 13th or 14th. So check back then. And remember my college football pick show. It'll be on November 15th. OU now 7-2. And Bob Stoops, by the way, number 2 all-time for most wins at Oklahoma. He passes the great Bud Wilkinson. Only Barry Switzer has more victories at OU than Bob Stoops. And you get the feeling that it's not a question of if, but rather when Bob Stoops will become the all-time winningest coach in Sooner history. Congratulations, Bob. And Boomer Sooner.